have Ryan Michler with us, who is the founder of the Order of Man and the Iron Council, two programs that are for men to help men become the men that they really are. Did I say that right, Ryan?
Sounds great. Yeah, probably better than I could have said it myself.
So I just really, as the ladies know, in my membership with Upkeep 3, I have kind of followed in your footsteps a little bit, meeting with one of your partners on how to figure out how to get this information out. And
sure.
Your motto of protect, provide, and preside goes right along with what I share with my ladies on protect, provide, and procreate is a man's natural DNA.
Yeah.
So today in our discussion, what I'm hoping is, as I explained to you just a moment ago, I work with women to help them do their part in their marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the men have a part too. The wives can't make them do their part.
True. This is true.
Right? And I have a lot of women that are striving really hard to do their part. And so I'm hoping as we discuss this today, we can kind of have this interview catered to their husbands and recognizing what their part might be and finding that there's a support system for them as well.
Okay.
That they don't have to go through this battle on their own.
Sure.
And so what I would like to start with is, first of all, your personal story. How did you even get to this point? How did you even decide, okay, I'm going to start, these memberships for men and
get
them get to where they need to be? How did this come about for you?
Well, it's a long story. I won't bore you with all the details. But when I was young, when I was 3 years old, my dad was out of the picture. I had some additional stepfathers to come into my life who were not really great examples of what it meant to be a man, and I didn't really know any different because that was life. We get stuck into our patterns and we get stuck into life and the box that we are, and we don't think anything different. It really wasn't until I actually spent some time in Iraq with the military, and it wasn't until I got back from Iraq and started to really work on the relationship and be more engaged with the relationship I had with my wife. So when I left for Iraq, we were married for 5 months at the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was gone for a year and a half, and then I came back and we were newlyweds. I mean, we had to get used to each other again. And for a long time we floundered, and I specifically floundered because I didn't really have an example or a model of, okay, how does a husband engage with his wife? How does a father engage with his son? I had a 6-month-old son at the time. And I struggled, and I went out into work and I did all the things that I felt like I was supposed to do. And the problems started to come to the surface about how I was dealing with my own insecurities and my own ideas of inadequacies and things like that. And so I can't remember the argument that my wife and I got into, but one evening we get into an argument, and I remember saying to her, I don't even want to be married anymore. And she agreed to that. And the next morning she left, and she took my 6-month-old son at the time. So when that happened, I blamed it all on her. Like, how could she do this? Why was she disloyal? Why didn't she appreciate the work that I was doing? And I put all of the burden of responsibility for our marriage and our problems on her. And I don't know why this changed, but somewhere during our separation, I came to the conclusion, and I'm so glad I did. It was a liberating feeling, and it's literally altered the course of my life, that maybe it's not all her fault. Now, she'd be the first to tell you that she had her part to play, and she was in a dark place too at the time. But I began to take ownership of my own responsibility and my own, again, shortcomings and inadequacies in the relationship, and my ability to communicate and be what I actually wanted to be, which was a good husband for her and a good father for my son at the time. And I, at that point, thought our marriage was over. I thought we were done. Which was a hard notion to wrestle with. But at the same time, it was really liberating because for the first time in my life, I stopped really trying to control her and in a way manipulate her to try to get her to come back to me. And I thought, if I could fix her, then I can fix the relationship. Yeah. Once I realized that I can't fix her and that the relationship is over and our marriage is ended, is now I get to go to work on myself. And that's exactly what I did. I surrounded myself with great men who were successful in business, men who were successful with their relationships and their wives and their children. And I tried to find people, men specifically, who were doing great things in the world. and in their own lives. And as I began to do that, and as I began to get my health back in check and get my finances in order and get my mind right and do all the things that I now teach men how to do, it was really fascinating, because it was like flipping a light on the wall, the way that she responded to me. And the conclusion that I came to is that the way that we can't control other people, but what we can do is we can influence people. So women can influence their husbands, husbands can influence their wives. They can't control or get them to do things. Only through their own actions does it become influential, right? So if I decide that I'm going to start eating unhealthy and I'm going to live an unhealthy lifestyle, then my decisions are going to negatively impact and influence my wife and my kids. And the same is true about the healthy decisions I decide to make. So a lot of people will say, for example, well, how do I get my wife on board with wanting to eat healthy? Well, are you eating healthy? No. Why don't you try that first and then see if she doesn't come around? Same thing with kids. So long story short, we actually ended up salvaging our marriage. This year we celebrated 13 years of marriage. I've got 4 kids. And we still have our fair share of arguments and contention and things like that and disagreements, but we're more equipped to handle those things. So to answer your question, how did I get into this? Again, trying to shorten this story down a little bit. I started to share my story, and I started to share about how I really wasn't equipped to be the best man that I could be. I didn't know how to be a great husband, a great father. And as I began to share this story with just friends, people that I knew, it was amazing how many men were actually experiencing the same thing. I think men in general were expected to put on the front, right? That we know it all, that we have it figured out. We're very stoic. Nothing gets to me. I can't let anything in. And it was fascinating as I shared my story to see how many men were actually experiencing things very similar. From the front and the outside, it looked amazing, perfect life. But inside, some things were happening and going on. And the more that I did this, the more that I realized, man, I need to step up and do something about this. And I threw my hat in the ring, and I decided that I'm going to start an organization that's going to help men step more fully into their lives as men. And so we've been going for about 2.5 years now. And it's been an amazing ride, and it's very rewarding and satisfying. And the messages I get from the men that I work with is humbling and inspiring for me to be a good man too.
I love that you went through this journey and you found sharing your story, right, created an avenue for other people to relate with you, which then ignited this passion, and you went off of that passion. I think there's so much power in our own personal stories instead of allowing them to hold us back.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think we do that as a self-preservation strategy, right? We can't and I think men are probably more guilty of this than women. And I know it's true definitely for my wife. She's got girlfriends and they play bunco and they call each other, hey, how you doing? Or, maybe one of her girlfriends is going through a rough time in the relationship or whatever, or with the kids, whatever it is. And they're talking and they're communicating, except for men don't do that. Right.
No, we don't.
I mean, we very rarely do we have friends. I know, like, when I got in the relationship with my wife, the relationships I had with my buddies went out the window. Mm-hmm. The things that were important to me, the activities I was engaged in and working out, and the things that uplifted me, those were put on the side burner. And it's not her fault. I'm not blaming that on her. I'm just saying I made a decision at that point to neglect these things that are important for something else that is also important. But in losing that balance, I think we run into some very challenging times, which I certainly did as well as her.
I totally agree with that. I often talk to the ladies in my program. Women need women and men.
Mm-hmm.
Men need women.
Sure.
And they have lost that. There's been a disconnect, like you said. I think so many men, when they get married, they lose their guy friends. They lose that. And especially, I love that part of your story where you didn't have that father figure, right? You didn't even have an example of how to be a man. And I think that happens more often than not, even when men have a father figure.
Oh, 100%. And I think that statistic is going to get worse. I mean, you look at divorces, and you look at the amount of women who are raising children on their own. Dad's non-existent. If he is in the picture, he's not really present emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And so these boys and girls are growing up without a role model of what it means to be a man. And young women, girls, are growing up without an example of what they should be looking for in a future partner as well. I think we're going to see more and more of this as time goes on, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you're correct. I think you're correct. Um, so the part in your story where you were kind of like after you two separated and you were kind of pushing it all the responsibility on your wife.
Mm-hmm.
When I teach women, I talk about how when we're not willing to own our own crap, we often portray.
For sure. Yeah, definitely.
So you were portraying on her, and it probably took some sort of, like you said, you had aha moments of you deciding to own your own stuff. What do you say to men who are still in that portraying? Because I have wives that are working on what they have control over, and their husbands might have some things that they need to have control over, but they're still portraying. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be doing this. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be in this place,
Right, right.
How do you talk to a man to help him learn to own his own part?
So here's my thought. And I think generally speaking, men have the tendency to look at the result, the bottom line. Like, what is this action creating, right? That's, if you think about what our purpose is, it's to identify problems and to solve them.
Right, right.
So that's how we're programmed, biologically programmed to operate. What we also do is we put up this wall of an ego as well. Like, I'm supposed to have it figured out. I need to know what's going on. It couldn't possibly be me, because that damages our pride, our ego, and therefore we don't want to admit that it's our fault. Sometimes it takes rock bottom, which is what it took for me. It took a very dark time in my life to jolt me back into the reality that, yeah, she had a part to play in it, but so did I. And that's the part that I missed. And that's the part that I overlooked. And I came to this point in my life where I was at that point then more concerned about producing the result. And the result that I wanted from that was to have a deep and meaningful relationship with my wife. I wanted her obviously to be in my life with my son. And what I had been doing up to that point wasn't working. So if a guy's listening to this and he's saying, if it wasn't for you, and if you would do this, and if you weren't doing that, then I would have X, Y, and Z, ask yourself, has that produced the result that you want? Has your attitude or your thought process or your action produced the desired outcome? If the answer is no, you probably ought to consider doing something a little different, which is what I did. I decided, you know what, this is not producing what I want. Let me try something different. I owned what I could own and fixed those things. And miraculously, the output, the result changed. So I think we get so bogged down in being right and preserving our ego, when in all reality, we should be more concerned with producing the desired objective, the desired outcome. And that requires a sense of humility.
Yeah, it does for sure. I appreciate that. I felt like that is going to resonate well with a lot of men that might listen to this. The other part to that is you now have a connection, obviously, with kind of self-help, bettering yourself.
Sure.
Power behind that. Do you want to share a little bit on how you've discovered how diving in and figuring out your part and self-help? And I love how you said you surrounded yourself around men that you wanted to have those positive traits, right? Men who were good fathers, men who were good businessmen, men who were, striving to be whole men. That was a version of self-help. That was a version of reaching outside of the box and going, I'm going to do this. Because I think a lot of times, and tell me if this resonates with you, people look at self-help as, well, I'm admitting a weakness if I go there.
I had a good conversation with an author, and he talked about this idea of self-help. He didn't really like the term because it does connotate like I need help. I don't know. And what he said, and I can't remember the exact term, but he reframed self-help to self-growth, right? Self-expansion. And some might say that's semantics, and maybe it is, but if it's going to help you think about it a little differently to actually then engage in the behavior that you should be, I think that's great. I think here's for me, here's my personality. I'm a driving personality. I'm results driven. I'm in your face. I want to produce the results. I want to do it quickly, and I want it all right now. I lack patience. I mean, that's just my personality. I think a lot of guys fall into that camp. Mm-hmm. But here's what I recognized is that when we make excuses for our lackluster performance, whether that's in the relationship or the business or our health or the bank account, you name it, and we put the responsibility or the burden of responsibility on other people, our children, our wives, our bosses, the economy, the president, the whoever. What we actually do is we actually give away all of our power to do something about it. And so what I was doing when I came up with the excuse that my wife wasn't being a good wife and she wasn't supportive of me and she wasn't doing what I thought at the time a good wife should be doing, I put all of the power that I have inherently in myself and I said, here, have my power. And I became a slave to whatever she felt like she was going to do or inclined not to do.
Yeah.
And so taking ownership of your life and taking responsibility and understanding your role to play in it is not a position of weakness. It's actually a position of power, because now potentially for the first time in a man's life, he can say, yeah, the reason I lost money in the market had nothing to do with the economy, but because I wasn't smart enough or didn't gain the information I needed to make a prudent decision. Or the reason that our marriage is failing is not because my wife is X, Y, and Z. It's because I'm not showing up the way I need to show up as a husband. It's a really fascinating thing. And I hear men say this all the time. Well, Ryan, you don't know my wife. She's this and she's that. I'm like, well, you married her. You made the decision. And the natural progression or follow-up response to that is, well, she's changed. Well, so have you. So what's to keep you from changing or reverting back to the man that she loved initially, or growing and expanding and potentially producing a different result in her? This is a powerful position, not a position of weakness.
Oh, that was so well said. So well said, because that's the same platform I work with these ladies. Let's take you back to the person you were that he married.
Right.
Right? Let's reconnect with those amazing traits that we have that we give up because of maneuvering through the mess and intricacies of life and marriage. And yeah.
And there's this term I heard, and I wish I could say I coined it. I did not, but it's noble excuses. Noble excuses. We, like as men, for example, we give up a lot. We do. And I know women do too. When we enter into a relationship, it's just kind of part of the deal. Sacrifice is the name of the game.
Yeah.
But we give up so much of ourselves, and then we blame it on our wives and on our kids or on whatever. And we think that it's a noble thing to do. Like, oh, I really want to go work out and exercise, but my kids need me at that time in the morning. Or I really want to pursue this endeavor in a new business or a new venture or a new hobby, but I can't leave and take time away from my wife. And so we create and craft these noble excuses that everybody pats us on the back and says, that's a good decision. You did good. You picked the right thing. I got to say, you probably overlooked some things that you need in your life, which is some margin and some space and some boundaries to take care of yourself as a man. And also women need to worry about taking care of themselves as well.
I agree. Self-care is so pertinent. If you aren't taking care of yourself, how are you supposed to be a whole person that you're giving to somebody else?
Exactly.
Right? And women really struggle with that. We do not fill our wells. We have no relationship with our needs. We will self-sacrifice to the point of exhaustion. And that's another thing with the women I work with. They're like, Trina, I don't even know how to discover what I need. I mean, that's how disconnected they are. And so, yeah.
And then it goes even worse. I mean, that exhaustion, but then it also gets into resentment, right? So like, for example, let's say a woman has an interest of pursuing art. I'm just throwing that out there. Okay. So she's interested in pursuing art. She finds a man, she gets married, they live happily ever after with their 2.5 kids and all that fun stuff. Right. And then she looks back 20 years later and she's like, oh, you remember in college, like I really liked to do art. Well, I gave that up for you. Right.
Right.
And then it creates this level of animosity and resentment because she wasn't bold enough. And I'm not just talking about women, but men do this too. We're not bold enough to establish and maintain some healthy boundaries for yourself. See, the point of marriage isn't to give all that you have to another person. Like, you have to find a way to energize yourself. So this is what happens to men. What happens is they get into a relationship, and I'm sure this happens with women as well, is they depend on their wives to provide all of the energy. Okay, so they give up their friends, they give up their hobbies, they give up their activities, They sacrifice for the family, which is noble, right? And that's the trap. They sacrifice for their kids. They sacrifice for the business and the advancement. And they're so tired, and I speak from truth because this is me, are so tired that now I rely on my wife to provide the masculine energy that I should be bringing. And what happens is now she exhausts not only her feminine energy, but also her masculine energy, because we possess both. And she's being asked to be the man and the woman, and she gets exhausted. And then what happens? She comes to the relationship, or I hear a guy who says, my wife said she's not attracted to me anymore. My wife said the spark is dead. My wife said that she's not in love with me, or there's no fire. Yeah, that's because you extinguished it. You're the one that put it out because you expected her, consciously or unconsciously, to provide the energy that you should have been bringing to the table. The reason that my relationship works and our relationship works, and the reason I'm sure that your relationship after, 27 years works, 26 years, is because you two can operate independently of each other. Like, I don't need my wife in order to be successful. She doesn't need me in order to be successful. We've decided to be a union and we're more powerful together, but I don't need her and she doesn't need me. Now, some people will hear that and think, well, that's not a healthy relationship. That is the healthiest relationship. Yes. Because I can stand on my own 2 feet and so can she, we're stronger together. I don't rely on her and she doesn't rely on me. We're stronger together.
I 100% agree with that. 100%. No good is going to come from either partner sacrificing to the point of exhaustion. And you're exactly correct with the resentment. The resentment kills love. Mm-hmm. Totally. And resentment, I know I spoke to you about the intense woman beforehand. My ladies will understand what this means. Resentment is the core of the intense woman. And these husbands, I'm sure, they get to the point that the resentment of like, I gave up everything for you. Mm-hmm. Why are you not happy?
Right.
Right. And I think we often, both partners, rely on the other for our happiness.
Right.
Happy. And that's not fair. That is so much pressure on one person. Like, I'm supposed to create your happiness. Are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah.